Peace and blessing, family. It's your man Maarifa, and welcome to another Maarifa moment where knowledge is reborn. Are you ready? Let's go. All right, and we black. Yeah, it's your man Maarifa Black yet again. I know I've been gone for a minute, but I've been out on vacation, man. You know what I'm saying? Doing a little field research, relaxing my mind, you know what I'm saying? Enjoying some time off and getting my battery recharged and ready to come back and give more lessons and videos to the people. All right, but it's very important for you to go ahead and do that, you know what I'm saying, in life. You can't just be working all the time. You got to give yourself time to balance yourself out. You know what I'm saying? But dig, you know how we do it. Your man is black, fresh and ready to go with another great topic for today. We're going to be discussing the Hyksos and the origins of who they are. All right, but before we do all that, you know how we do it. We're going to get these admin notes out the way. So you see right here, there's a banner right here. We need you to like, subscribe, follow, and share all of our social media platforms at Maarifa Asar LLC. The second thing we need you to do, you know how we do right after this video is over, rush over to maarifaasar.com. Look at me, I'm rocking the fly Maarifa Asar gear right now. You should go ahead and purchase you something for the summertime. Look at these fly melanated beans looking fresh to death, you know what I'm saying? The #1 clothing brand for casual comfort is maarifaasar.com. Google that. 5 stars on Google right now. Check that out. All right, so dig. Now that that's out the way, are y'all ready for the lesson for today? Let's get it. Come on. All right. So what we looking at here, the Hyksos, you know what I'm saying? And why is it important for us to discuss and dig into who the Hyksos were and where did they come from? It's extremely important because you got to know the real history and the origins of who these people are. Because today you have a lot of group of people who try to, associate and affiliate the Hyksos with their particular religious affiliation or their faith and their belief. And then they'll tie that in order to, convince you that these things were, validation for their literature. Okay. So we got to make sure that we understand who the Hyksos were before we jump off into, believing something that somebody tells us it sounds good. All right. So let's go ahead and get into it. The Hyksos in real life, all right, they have this, history, in ancient Egypt, in Kemet, in Lower Kemet, all right, which by the Mediterranean Sea, which stated that they ruled Lower Kemet from 1650 BCE all the way down to 1550 BCE. All right. So in that time frame, they were known or said to be rulers of Lower Kemet. All right. Now during this dynastic period, this is the second intermediate period of the dynastic period of Kemet, where pharaohs, kings and queens ruled on the throne. All right. So in this essence, you got to look at it from the real history perspective. You can't place the Hyksos, inside of a different box. You got to put them in real history to determine who they really are. All right. So when they reigned in this region, you notice here on this map, they were located there at the upper northeastern region in Avaris near the Mediterranean Sea. That's where they were headquartered, you know what I'm saying? And they pretty much had, that region, going up into Israel, Syria, and all things of that nature. All right. And they came down a little bit into the middle part of, Lower Kemet. Okay. So, which was close to Thebes, which is today Luxor. All right. So we'll look at it. So back during this time, we had the period of the Middle Kingdom going into the Second Intermediate Kingdom, 1802 BCE all the way up to 1550 BCE. We had Amenemhat III. Amenemhat III was a pharaoh king, and he had a son, Amenemhat IV, who was the pharaoh king. Now, when Amenemhat III, he also had daughters as well, Sobek Neferu. Now, when Amenemhat IV passed away, he didn't have an heir, to the throne. He didn't have a male heir to the throne, and his sister took over, Sobek Neferu. She became Pharaoh queen. you know what I'm saying, of the region and things of that nature. She moved her, administration down to Thebes, which is in, near Upper Kemet. All right, so in Luxor. So she moved down to Thebes. But Sebek Neferu, when she passed away, she didn't have a heir either, which left, Lower Kemet vulnerable. All right, so you had, no rulership, at that time of taking over. And then you had these other pharaohs that rose up, what I'm saying, down in Upper Kemet. So the dynasties were kind of split. They were sharing, regions and things. The Upper and Lower Kemet were not unified the way that they normally usually be, during this time period. So Lower Kemet was kind of vulnerable. And then you get these Hyksos, who were already in the region. You know what I'm saying? Living in that northeastern, terrain in that area near the Mediterranean Sea in Lower Kemet. They were already there. You know what I'm saying? So they were foreigners in the land, and they were already migrated into the land and settled there. And they had ultimately, rose to power. You know what I'm saying? So they rose to power in Lower Kemet and took over in that region, like I said, from 1650 BCE over to 1550 BCE. So you had a time period there where foreigners were ruling in Lower Kemet. And then you had, the Sudan and Nubian, rulership down in Upper Kemet, okay, down to the south, near closer to Sudan. So there was not a unification of Upper and Lower Kemet. Now, come along, Teo came along, and he didn't, like that too much. Teo was upset at the fact that there was no unification between the two lands. Most likely the resources were, being scarce, and, a lot of, and they may have been, taxed on the resources, or they wasn't sharing. You know what I'm saying? The Hyksos wasn't, being fair with the people. So they probably had an issue, with going back and forth with the trade, system, and economically, having issues and things of that nature with resources. So Teo, what he did was he went to war with the Hyksos. All right. And you can see his, skeleton that still remains. You can see the scar that was left in his head when he got hit with a mace head, you know what I'm saying? And they cracked his skull and he died in war. So that set off another issue right there where his son, Kamos came up and took over for his father, and he battled the Hyksos as well. But then Kamos died while he was young. Okay, so then his little brother Amos the first, took over, and then ultimately defeated the Hyksos in battle and pushed them out of the region. Okay, he sent them further north to the land of Canaan, which is today modern day Israel. All right, so that's the story, the real true historical story of the Hyksos. You know what I'm saying? So you got to understand the history and get to know it. Okay, so let's see here. Now, white theologians, what they would do, white European theologians, what they would do, they come into Egypt trying to excavate the land. You know what I'm saying? They send archaeological teams. They send, excavators to come out and excavate the lands in search of anything that they can find. Isotope data. They take isotope data from bones and teeth and things of that nature to try to find a connection, between their biblical literature and the modern day, Hyksos, or the ancient Hyksos. I'm sorry. So what they're trying to do is paint this picture or draw a bridge to bring together, their Bible literature, which is not, has been proven to be false. You know what I'm saying? And tie it in with real history, people who actually really existed in history. So what they're trying to do is say that the Hyksos were the Hebrews of their Bible, you know what I'm saying, which is a complete lie. All right, so it's a falsehood that they're trying to pass on as a connection or a means in which they can connect their biblical Hebrew Jewish story to a real people who actually lived during that time period. Okay, so they'll come in and try to do everything that they can to validate their stories in the book, the Bible. You know what I'm saying? So you have, in the stories of the Bible, you have the ancient stories of Abraham coming from the land of Ur, which is modern day Iraq today. You know what I'm saying? So they said that Abraham traveled into the land of Canaan, which is modern day Israel, and then he traveled down into Egypt with his wife Sarah. All of these stories are found in the book of Genesis. You know what I'm saying? So what these Egyptologists and these, theologians, what they're trying to do is tie in, this story that they put together, they concocted, the Greeks did, so many years, centuries ago. The Greeks concocted these stories, and they're trying to now validate these stories by putting the Hyksos with these Hebrews. They're trying to say that the Hebrews are the Hyksos. You know what I'm saying? Which is a complete lie. Because we had a Seti one in his tomb of the king's list in Abydos. The Abydos Kings list will show you, all of the many pharaohs that was identified on the walls in Kemet. But when you look in the Bible, in the biblical stories, they never make any mention of a name of the pharaoh in which the Abraham and the Joseph, you know what I'm saying, and Jacobs had, encountered. So when they said that Joseph went into Egypt and became this great leader, he was the son of Jacob, you know what I'm saying, in the story of the Bible. And he became this great leader in Egypt. And the Pharaoh had given him all of this power and authority over Egypt because he interpreted this dream for the Pharaoh. You know what I'm saying? Which is some fantasy, mythological story, you know what I'm saying, which never was validated or anything of that nature. And when you read the story in the book of Genesis in the Bible, it never mentions a particular name of the Pharaoh in which Joseph encountered. It just says Pharaoh. You know what I'm saying? That could be, any Pharaoh king. So how convenient of them to be able to use the title of Pharaoh in order to put inside of their story. So therefore, you can't backdate it and go back and say when these Hebrews or these Jews actually was in or present the land of Egypt. Okay, so you can't, tie them back to a particular time frame because the white Egyptologists and the white European theologians, they knew, you know what I'm saying, that the walls in Kemet already showed the Abydos Kings list in Seti I's tomb. You know what I'm saying? So there's no denying. In the Abydos Kings list has all the names of every Pharaoh king in succession. All the names of all the Pharaoh kings in succession, you know what I'm saying, on the wall, etched in wall, who ruled during that time frame. Okay. So all the way back from Narmer, all the way through the 30th dynastic period. All right. So they had all the names. So if the Bible was true, then they would actually be able to tell you which name of the pharaoh, so you can place it in real history, the date and the time in which these alleged Hebrews were there present in Egypt. But they didn't. They made the generic term, they gave the generic title of Pharaoh in their story in the book of Genesis. So you can't backdate it and place the Hebrews or the Jews in Egypt at a particular time in history. So it's very, ambiguous. It's very, for them to be able to confuse the people, and not be able to be specific as to who they talked to or who they spoke to or who was ruling in Egypt at the time, because they knew that if they put a name on that particular story, that somebody will be able to go back and trace the history, the real history in history, and find out exactly if those Hebrews existed and if they were in that region at that particular time. So they didn't do that in the story. So the story is not valid. All right. So here again, like I said, this is the travel route, which the Bible says, you can Google this, but the Bible says that Abraham came out of the land of Ur, which is modern day Iraq, and he traveled through and this, that, and the third. This is their story, their myth, in which how they say that Abraham, which was the first Hebrew, you know what I'm saying, to ever exist, was the one who came and traveled into Egypt according to the biblical story, okay, in the book of Genesis. So We all know that that was false and that's fake. So then you have these other factious groups, these fanatical groups that have evolved out of Christianity, Judaism, like the Black Hebrew Israelites. Now, the Black Hebrew Israelites, they want you to believe that these Hebrews were African people, okay? Which is somewhat true to an extent, and I'm going to go ahead and get into that a little bit down into this video, but they were not Hebrews, okay? Hebrews don't exist. You know what I'm saying? So what is a Hebrew? All right, so you got historians like Herodotus, who lived during the period of 450 BCE and who traveled into Egypt, who actually saw, eyewitnessed with his own two eyes, Egyptian culture, you know what I mean? Engulfed himself in Egyptian culture, traveled into Syria, traveled into Iraq and Iran, traveled into Jerusalem, Israel, all of these regions, into Greece. This Greek historian, had no bias. He didn't write with a Hellenistic, mind state. What he did was an objective view, telling the truth, what he saw, just reporting the news, just like any news reporter want to be honest and true. He'll tell you, exactly what he saw. Okay, that's what an honest reporter would do, be objective. You know what I'm saying? They would not have biases, they would not have prejudice, they would not have an agenda, they would not try to push any type of ideology on you. They're just going to report exactly what they saw. And a lot of scholars put credence into what Herodotus wrote, because it was later on archaeologists and excavators and scientists have went back to Egypt several thousands of years later and actually found artifacts that Herodotus talked about, found bones that Herodotus had mentioned, found places and structures and ruins in which Herodotus had wrote about. So they actually have evidence of what Herodotus had wrote. And Herodotus never mentioned anything about a Hebrew, nowhere in his writings. Nowhere. Nothing about a Hebrew. So if these Hebrews slash Jews were so great, and if they were so mighty and in great in number, like the Bible likes to, fabricate this story and elaborate on how great, and the conquest and the conquering and the building of the temples and all of the many things, the sacrifices and the rituals and all of that stuff that these Hebrews were said to have done in the Bible stories, then Herodotus, who had eyewitness traveled through these regions, would have actually saw their greatness, and he would have actually wrote about them. But he didn't. He wrote about what he saw, which was the Egyptians, the Greeks, the Syrians, the Persians. Okay? These were the real people who were in those regions at that time. All right. So from whatever, the stories that these Hebrews are, they never left any, evidence of their existence anywhere. You don't see any ruins about any Hebrews. You don't see any wall art, carvings, inscriptions, or anything like that about any Hebrews. You don't see anything of coinage or nothing like that. No burial sites, no temple structures, none of that. You know what I'm saying? Of any Hebrews or Jews in that region. Okay, so it's only 70 miles between Israel and Egypt, upper and lower Egypt. So it's not that far. You're talking about a 45-minute drive and maybe like a day and a half, travel by foot. You know what I'm saying? So it's not that far for them to be able to come into that region. And if these Hebrews were so great, then they would have done, or they would have left a lasting legacy. And just like all the other cultures, like the Egyptian culture, the Greeks, the Persians, and you see here the Persian, that at the bottom of that, item right there, you see right there, the Persians had such, they were also influenced by the Nile Valley culture. Okay, the Nile Valley culture is an African culture, coming from the southern part of Africa. All right, all the way up through the Mountain of the Moons in Uganda. You know what I'm saying? Following the Nile River up north, okay, into the Mediterranean Sea. And as you can see, the Nile Valley culture semblance inside of their wall carvings, okay? And you see, the sun disk of Ra. You know what I'm saying? The omnipresence of Ra, Haru, Horus, whoever, the winged disc of Horus, however you want to say it, but I call it Haru. You know what I'm saying? The ever presence of omnipresence, that was inscribed on all of the doors in ancient Kemet. You know what I'm saying? To let everyone know that the presence of Ra was there. So you see also in Persia that circled in red right here on this diagram, that they have also the winged sun disk identified from ancient Egypt, Kemet. Okay, so these people that they call the Persians also had, some Nile Valley culture influence in their carvings, their art, wall art carvings as well. So they picked it up, from somewhere. They had to get it from somewhere, and they got it from the Nile Valley. Okay, so all of that ancient, African structures, are embedded in the cultures of, several different people within that region, these different tribes. All right, so that culture had traveled along with those in that region. All right, so that's how that went down. And here you have like this timeline, this timeline they have of Abraham from the Bible's perspective, Abraham and Joseph, and how, Jacob and them became a nation, and these Hebrews had grew into these mighty nation, and they grew in numbers according to the biblical story, and how they became, great, this, that, and the third. But like I said, Herodotus never wrote about them. So how could he, how could they have all of this history that you can only find in the Bible? You don't have any other evidence nowhere else. No temple structures, no coinage, you know what I'm saying? No burial sites, no bones, no excavation of bones, nothing like that. They don't have anything thing like that that matches the ancient Egyptians. The ancient Egyptians have all of that. They have the bones, they have the temple structures, they have the ruins, they have the carvings on the wall, the hieroglyphic metal netter. They have all of the evidence of them being pottery. They got all type of stuff. All of them being in that region, and ruling in that region. Even their culture had stretched all the way west, to Iraq and Iran, through Assyria, even up into Greece. You know what I'm saying? So the Nile Valley culture and the spirituality of those ancient, Kemetic, Nubian, had traveled all the way up, even it went west as well. You know what I'm saying? But we'll discuss that at a later date and time. But like I said, you know what I'm saying? They have these, how convenient it is of these theologians to be able to utilize the time period in which the Hyksos reigned from 1650 BCE to 1550 BCE, where they're saying that Joseph had ruled, and Abraham had came in to the region, and Joseph was in Egypt during this time. They're trying to utilize real history to validate their biblical story, their mythological biblical story. All right. So they're trying to tie in real history with their Bible story to validate their Bible, in which they know they can't do it because it's not, really no Hebrew, like I said, artifacts and things of that nature. So Mantheo, right here, Mantheo was a Coptic Greek historian. During his time frame, he had wrote a lot of the histories of, the Hyksos and things of that nature, and they came up with the Turin list of the pharaoh, kings, and queens that were identified. And this is a fragmented part of the Turin list that you can find. And you had him describing these, Hyksos, which was foreign rulers. All right, so you have, the crook right there, which is the staff, and then you have on the image of the hieroglyph, of that of the hills. All right, so they depicted and said that this meant that they were rulers of the hills. All right, so rulerships of the hills, foreign rulers. All right, so then you had Flavius Josephus, who came years later after Mantheo, and Mantheo, pretty much had his, histories written down and things of that nature. And then Flavius Josephus, who was a traitor of the Jewish sect, he was a Roman, historian, and he had pretty much traded on his people. So he was going to be biased in his, writings, and he was trying to keep that Hellenistic, viewpoint, pushing that agenda, and keep, pushing that biblical mythological story that they were trying to create. You know what I'm saying? With the Alexanders and Caesars and people of Rome and things of that nature when they were trying to establish themselves and establish the church. So they were using Josephus. So he's morally known by, scholars to be a pseudo historian. That means he was, crazy. His stuff is not valid. His writings and things of that nature are not something that you can utilize in order to validate, true history, because he has an agenda that he was pushing. He has a bias that he was pushing with his Christianity. Okay, so he was trying to tie the Hyksos to the Hebrews in his historical writings. Okay, so he was saying that the Hebrews are the Hyksos, which is a complete lie. So what you're seeing here is Abisha the Hyksos, all right? And this is a description, a wall painting, a wall carving in the tomb of Khnum-Hotep, okay, in Beni Hassan. All right, so around 1900 BCE, this wall inscription was, drawn on the walls in Khnum-Hotep, their temple structure. So you see right there, Abisha holding the ibex goat. The ibex goat is an indigenous animal from the mountainous regions in, Lower Kemet and Israel. It's found in that region. So you can tell by the long horns of the goat. And then up above his head, right in front of his head, you'll notice that inscribed there, the crook, which is the staff, and then the hills, the three hills right there, that is an inscription of the foreign lands. All right, the hills, so ruler of foreign lands. All right, so Abisha the Hyksos right there was bringing in other Hyksos, with them, and then you'll see on the scarab coin in which they inscribe that hieroglyph with that same hieroglyphic with the crook and then the hills, and that picture will let you know exactly, what region that they came from. All right, with the ibex goat, and you see Abisha the Hyksos right there. All right, so this is the time period 1900 BCE in which they had on the walls in Kemet already, which they were saying that Abraham had came into this land, you know, and that's where they, concocted their stories. But we all know that the Greeks, had been in Kemet during this time, time period way before that. They came in the 300s, BCEs, the 4th century BCE, and they studied under the Egyptian, laws and things of that nature. And so they saw on the walls when they wrote their stories, and when the Romans came in, many centuries later after that, they already had these, carvings. The ancient Egyptians already had these carvings on their walls. So they knew, that you can fast forward many, 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 many years later with these Egyptologists who had this, Orientalist Christianity agenda that they were trying to push during the 1800s. You know what I'm saying? And they were using these time periods in order to try to relate it to their biblical stories. But when they put in their biblical stories, they never put the names of the pharaoh, because they knew that would be a direct connection back to a time period in real history where you can actually tie these Hebrews into existence. But they didn't do that in the biblical stories, and they're trying to interject themselves into real history with their biblical stories using Abisha the Hyksos, okay, trying to say that he was actually Abraham, the first Hebrew, all right, which is a complete lie. This is Abisha, you know what I'm saying, the Hyksos, not Abraham, no Hebrews, all right. So Abisha, you see right here on the walls of Khnum-Hotep the second in Beni Hassan, the story depicted there on the wall inscription, you can see him with the hieroglyph right there. There's two specific rather, hieroglyphs that you have to pay attention to here. Right above, the head right there is the hieroglyph of an Asiatic Am. All right, so this Asiatic this term that they had, Asiatic, was meant for foreigners. Okay, foreigners that were coming outside from Kemet. They were not indigenous to, the Kemetic, cultures that came out of Sudan and Nubia. All right, so the foreigners were identified as Asians. All right, so then you have, you know, Abisha, the Hyksos, identified as the foreign ruler. Okay, so his, hieroglyph that you see right above his head, right above the ibex goat's horns, you see that's identified as the foreign ruler. Okay, so then above him, the other guy who's holding the ibex goat behind Abisha, you see that hieroglyph right there, and it has the Asiatic Am. All right. So then that was trying to say that these people, these Hyksos, were foreign rulers from another land. They were Asiatic people. Okay. So you're looking at that from that perspective, and you got to understand. Now, according to Dr. Clyde Winters, he had did some study and research on it, and he went in to discover that back in the old kingdom they used Heka Kas, and Kas was a term that they were using for Cushite. Kas meant Cushite, and Cushite we know is the Ethiopian region. All right, so Ethiopia down to the south, in Lower Sudan, all right, and I mean Upper Sudan. I'm sorry, Upper Sudan down in the south. Okay, so Kas was of Cushite origin during the Old Kingdom. All right, so the Heka Kas they were inscribing on their scarab, coins and things of that nature, were identifying these Hyksos rulers. So the first four Hyksos rulers identified themselves as Kas. So what they were trying to do is say that they came from the land of Cush. All right, so they were trying to tie themselves back to their origin from their ancestors and the people that their tribes that they came from. Okay, so the Kas, the Heka Kas, here you see the symbols of the crook and things of that nature, and then you have the hills, the three hills. Those three Kas, those Kas combined together will equal Cushite or the Cushites. All right, so the Hyksos were trying to tell you that they have some ties, blood ties to the Cushites. Now, when you take a look at the wall inscriptions on the carvings in, the Medu Neter and the ancient Kemetic, wall structures, you'll see, have the pharaoh, defeating his enemies, his Hyksos enemies and things of that nature. And these were the description of the Hyksos. And you see in the bottom left corner, you have different tribes, and you could tell the way that their hair was different design, and how they would structure their hair, and they did their hair. You have the Hyksos right there identified with the Nubians, and you can see the difference between the hair structure and things of that nature. But the black woman is always able and capable of creating all phenotypes. You know what I'm saying? The wavy hair, the curly, kinky hair, the nappy hair, the long and straight hair, the pointy nose, the wide and broad nose. So all of the phenotypes are, captured within melanated beings. All right. So, you may have different tribes, who did things in different ways. You know what I'm saying? They call that culture. When they have an ethnicity, there's a cultural difference, the way that they talk and communicate with each other in their tribe, the way that they dress, the way that they wear their hairstyle is no different than today. You see different, ethnicities having, several different dialects and, slang in which they communicate with each other. People from the South and people from the North, they may have different dialects, but, you can tell the meanings are the same. You know what I'm saying? So there's no difference here with ancient Africans, with different tribes, and different ethnic groups, but they were all of one bloodline. You know what I'm saying? The African bloodline. So from that essence, you distinguish them by the way that they look, the way that they dress, and the way that their hairstyles were, and you could distinguish them that way. but they were still of African melanated, bloodlines. Okay, so they just may have come from different regions or different parts of the African region, north or south and things of that nature, and settled in those lands. So what you see right here is, what people are trying to call Hebrews. They're trying to say that the Amorites, are the Habarus and things of that nature. And then they trying to distinguish and say that the black Canaanites, and then you had these Aryans, they were calling Aryans and things of that nature. But take a look at the hairstyles, the knotty dreads, look at the dreads and the wavy styles of the hair, you know what I mean? So the kinkiness of the hair, that is a distinct, African feature, phenotype. You know what I mean? Look at the fullness of the lips. The people try to say the pointiness of the nose, is of European, structure. But, Africans have pointy nose as well. You know what I mean? So we have all the phenotypes of everything because the black woman is able to create all phenotypes. So you got to look at the different many shades, of color in which the African or melanated being is on the planet. So they're trying to say these white Europeans, these theologians and the black Hebrew Israelites are trying to distinguish them based on their skin color. They're trying to distinguish them based on, their ethnicity, the culture, and things of that nature. So they're trying to separate them out and say that these are the Hebrews, these are the Amorites, these are the, what I'm saying, the Canaanites, and this, that, and the third. But in reality, they all come from the same bloodline. Okay, they just have different, phenotypes of structure. Like for instance, my brother is light skinned and he has a pointier nose than I do. I'm dark skinned, but we came through the same mother. You know what I'm saying? Our mother carried us in the same womb and pushed us out of her womb. She birthed us, carried us 9 months and gave birth to us. Same bloodline, we just look different. You know what I'm saying? But we have the same bloodline. You know what I'm saying? He's light skinned, I'm dark skinned. No different, but we're brothers. We have the same blood type. So that's the same issue here with these Hebrews and things of that nature that you have identified there. Okay, so then they try to say, oh, these are the Hittites. But then back here, you see at the bottom left, the brother with the green, turban on his head, they trying to say he's a Hittite. But then they have that same brother right there, they were saying right here that he's an Amorite or a Habaru, which is allegedly a Hebrew. So they can't even, get the story straight. They don't know who these Hebrews are or where they came from or what. But they were made up concoction. And then we'll discuss later on, how these Hebrews eventually, came into, existence and things of that nature, through the biblical story. I'll give you what happened, how did they start in another video. All right. But these are Africans. Okay. So if you take a look at the hair and you can see the waviness of the hair, you can see the afros, you can see the big full lips and the nose. These are African tribes. Now, these tribes, lived in the northern region, near Greece, near Crete, the Phoenician area, Syria, coming on down to Israel and into the lower, the lower part of Kemet, lower Kemet near the Mediterranean Sea where these Hyksos had come from. Okay. So then you saying to yourself, look at these brothers right here. They call these the Canaanites. And then on the walls in Kemet, you see them inscribed in the walls of Kemet. You know, eventually they had beef with the Egyptians. And then you also got to understand that they interbred with these, Egyptians. Their women had babies by these Egyptians, these Nubians, and then they ultimately became, a different race or culture, but it's all the same bloodline. Okay, you got to understand these people were having sex back then as well, and they didn't have any condoms. There was no protection of something like that, so they were having babies. They were having mixed babies. Okay, so they were interbreeding. You know what I mean? Having sex, having babies. You know what I'm saying? All these tribes. Okay, so you got the Hittites, the Amorites, Canaanites, but they're all African. Okay, no Hebrew, none of that stuff. So when they say Hyksos are Asians, That just means that they are foreign rulers from the hills, the mountains. Okay. So in the hills and mountains in Israel or in Lower Kemet. All right. So you're talking about the mountainous regions in which these Africans, came out of and things of that nature, and they rose to power. You know what I'm saying? Because Sobek Neferu did not have an heir to the throne, so it left Lower Kemet vulnerable to, other rulership to come in and take over. All right. So that's what happened during the second intermediate period of dynastic period. But you look here, this is the cane of Tutankhamun. And Tutankhamun had inscribed on it, the Hyksos people. Look at the Hyksos people right here, light skinned with the slanted eyes, but the fullness of the lips and then the waviness of the hair, you got to take a look at it. So when you saying to yourself, these people look Asian, you know what I'm saying? What we consider Asian today. And then they also had the Asiatic on the hieroglyphic. Now, the Asiatic title meant foreign ruler, just a foreigner, okay? Somebody who was coming from the outside in, all right? So that's when you're looking at their features, and you can see the waviness of the hair, slantiness of the eyes, but then the fullness of the lips. This is nothing more than a light-skinned African, a light-skinned brother. You know what I'm saying? You got plenty light-skinned brothers, that are out there, but you got to see the African features that are in there. Okay. So from my theory and understanding, these Hyksos, may have had a Kushite, origin. They may have come from the Kushites, or even further south than that. Now, my theory is this, I believe that the black woman is God. Okay, so when I say the black woman is God, I did the video on it, breaking that all the way down. I'm not talking about the black woman being the ultimate creator, not saying that she created the sun, the stars, the heavens, and the moon like the ultimate supreme being. No, the black woman is not that. But when I say the black woman is God, she is an aspect of that creator because she's able to create and birth all phenotypes of human. Okay, so she can create all shades, colors, phenotypes. That means long hair, big, thick nose, full lips, little skinny lips, slanted eyes, knotty hair, long hair, dreads. The black woman can do it all. She has the DNA structure to create all human life forms, different shades, even albino. That's where you get your white Europeans from, the albinos that came from the black woman. Okay, so to understand that, you got to know who these Hyksos were. All right, and my theory is this: the Khoisan. The Khoisan. The Khoisan were hunter-gatherers. Okay, the Khoisan were also, migrants where they migrated and they didn't stay in the same location for too long of period of time. Remember that the Khoisan had traveled out of South Africa from mitochondrial Eve. They were part of that whole haplogroup from the very beginning. Okay, these, ancient African tribes, when I did the video, the different African tribes that started out, go back and watch that video. I revealed all of the different tribes that started out, the Twa, the Hutu, the Tutsi, the Khoisan, the Sans, all of these different tribes that came out of Africa. And you got to know and understand that they traveled in search of food and resources, and they traveled along the river. All right, so when they found the river, they traveled along the river because the river is a natural resource for water. So you're going to settle and then move in those lands and those regions. And when the resources go dry, then you move, you pick up and you carry on and you keep moving on to find more and more resources. And the Khoisan are people, that from originally came out. They were the ones who established that, traveling and migrating out of the southern region. And then you had other African tribes from the black woman go out and then, settle in different regions and parts of the land. But if you look at these Khoisans, they look Asian, but they're African. This is where the Asians started from. When these Africans, Khoisan, started having albino babies, That's where you get the white looking structure of the Asians that you have today. All right. So they started out as melanated beings. And it's very, 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 uh, uh, a probability is great that they went in and actually settled into the land of Lower Kemet. Is near a water source. You know what I'm saying? Is near, it has all the resources necessary in that region for to growing food and plenty of animals to eat and this, that, and the third. So there was a good fertile land in order for them to settle in. Okay. So I'm pretty sure they had a segment of people that went in and actually settled in those lands. You know what I'm saying? And became the Hyksos. They settled in the mountains and the hills and things of that nature. Came out and all of these stuff. So now, centuries later, after they migrated out, into, Lower Kemet, and they came into the land, into the region, and you can see here how they went out of Africa down from the south, the Khoisan, the Khoisan tribes that traveled out of Africa and came back into, the northern region. They went over into the east, into China, in through Asia, in through Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan region, all of that stuff, even up into Greece. You know what I'm saying? So the Khoisan went out and they traveled and migrated. This is who I believe the Hyksos were. These African Khoisan, they also interbred and had babies with the Nubians in the Egyptian Cushites, okay, the Ethiopians. So when you had the Hyksos rulers using the the Heka Kas symbols, you know what I'm saying, inscribed on their scarab coins, they were trying to tell you that their bloodline came from the Cushites, which were, indigenous tribes that came through from the Khoisan. And then they actually made it and had babies with the Cushite Ethiopians, which were the Hutu and the Watusi tribe and things of that nature of Ethiopia. All right. So they interbred and had children with these tribes and made a whole nother, tribal race ethnicity group. And then that ethnicity group moved further and migrated north and things of that nature and settled in those lands. But they were all African. Okay. No Hebrews, none of that stuff that they talking about, Hebrew this and Hebrew that, no Abraham, you know what I'm saying? None of that stuff, that they're trying to, enforce on you with the Bible. All right. So you got to know and trace the history all the way back to the bloodline. And you go through real history to see who these people are, okay, and where they come from. And you got to be real with yourself. If these Hebrews ever existed, they would have left an evidence of themselves. You don't come into existence into a land and don't leave anything behind to show who you are. Okay, so you can't find any remnants of any, artifacts or any skeletons or any tombs or any, ruins or anything that, bones or teeth or anything that can trace an isotope DNA, structure back to a Hebrew. You can't. All you can find is African, Egyptian, what I'm saying, Persian, Greeks. These are the real people who were actually in that North African region. Okay. So all of that other stuff that you find in the Bible was really false and it's fake and it's mythological stories, not meant to be taken literally. All right. So a book that I recommend that you go ahead and buy and purchase is The Histories of Herodotus, the writings of Herodotus and the histories in which he wrote about, particularly book two. Book two would tell you about the Egyptian story and, give you all the information that he, witnessed with his own two eyes about Egypt. And he'll break it down and tell you exactly what he saw, how, the Africans were ruling in that region, throughout the Nile Valley. Okay. So that's it for today. You know what I'm saying? That's all of the time we have. You know what I'm saying? Hopefully you enjoyed it and got something out of the lesson today. and get to know your African history. You know what I'm saying? It's very important for you to get to know African studies and follow the bloodlines, go all the way back and trace your history back to get to know who you are, so that when people come and bring a doctrine to you, that you won't be fooled by anything that they throw your way, and be convinced that that is the way and the truth. You know what I'm saying? Because they make it sound good, and they able to articulate it and tell you a story and make it sound very good and enticing. You know what I'm saying? It may not be true. It may be a good story, but it's not the truth all the time. So you got to do your research, you got to dig, and you got to actually find out if what they're saying to you is true. All right. So with that being said, the video is almost over, so go over to maarifasar.com and don't forget to make a purchase to dig. I'm rocking the Maarifa Asar right now. Look at all the fly melanated beans that are on the screen. You know what I'm saying? They fly and fresh for the summertime. You too can get fly and fresh for the summertime. You make a purchase at maarifasar.com. So head over there right after this video and go get something for yourself or your loved ones today. You dig? So with that being said, you know how we do it. This has been another Maarifa moment where knowledge has been reborn. So the more you know, the more you'll grow, and the better off we all shall be. So until next time, I'll say love and light. Peace. Let's go. All right. We made it. We made it. Live at Seneferu's Pyramid. Okay. Seneferu built this